blue skills, blue jobs, capacity building across along the coastline. So the panel explores how to close the blue skills gap and equip coastal communities to access the full potential of the blue economy through future-ready jobs. Now, as coastal economies are transforming, it's clear that traditional skill set alone will not unlock blue opportunities. So let's begin first by identifying where the biggest skills gaps lie. So Malini, let me come to you for your first intervention. As the maritime economy evolves rapidly, what skills should local job seekers develop to access emerging opportunities in the blue economy?
I will divide it into two parts. At the officer's level, if the youth is aspiring to be an officer on board a ship, the skills that would be required are obviously today, nothing goes without AI, right? So skills in artificial intelligence, especially the future ships are going to be basically run on electronics and AI. So artificial intelligence, twinning technology, this is something very, very important, especially not only for on-board ships, but also coming for shore jobs. Electronics engineering, or at least skills in electronics. And besides that, I think, and I'm speaking solely on the basis of my experience and observation in India, effective analytical skills and communication skills. If you look at what's happening regarding ships, there are a lot of incidents or accidents, and many of them finally come down to human error. Apart from the wellness of the seafarer, it's actually an analytical skill to have a preventive thought of what can go wrong, what can be set right, and on board the ship, how do you set it right? So all these. At the lowest level, there are skills, because there are different levels at which people go in for shipping. At the lowest levels, there are skills like welding, piping, offshore technology. These are in great demand, by the way. So these are some of the skills that one can think of while preparing for the future in maritime.
All right, Malini, so you've touched on AI, which I found was pretty fantastic. You also painted a good picture for me, but now I want you to take me back to the ground. So in reality, how much are maritime and educational institutions doing to keep up with what is needed to upskill the next generation? So I come from Seychelles. There's a very small student population at my university. There's no blue ocean curricula coming from secondary schools. By the time students come to university, we have to start from scratch. So in your opinion, how much are we doing? Do we need to do a little bit more?
I think the challenge that universities are facing is to ensure that the curriculum is keeping pace with the developments in the field, in terms of technology and in terms of interconnectivity. And this is where a university has a certain lethargy, because by definition, the review of the curriculum takes place once in 5 years. And in our university, we've had to do it almost every 6 months. It's almost concurrent, especially for certain courses. You don't review the entire curriculum, but you review the curriculum of certain elective courses, and because technology is changing extremely rapidly. There are also partnerships that are very necessary. So I think that we live in a world of collaboration. So partnerships, both global as well as we have a partnership with Batangas University in Philippines. We have a partnership with the Eastern University of Trincomalee in Sri Lanka. And we have with Erasmus. So we learn from each other what are the strengths and where we need to actually pick up. Apart from that, partnership with industry, because this is an applied field, so you can't just, it's not a basic science, physics, chemistry. We need to know what are the problems that the industries face. We do that through many universities. I think almost all universities do that through internships, through hackathons to identify problem and to actually work on it, to have this industry connect for consultancy so that you feed the, industry and academia feed into each other. So these are some of the things that the universities are doing and have to continue doing. Another challenge we face today is how do you ensure that, especially in shipping, how do you ensure that the graduate who comes out of the university is both knowledgeable and skillful? Because competency is one thing and knowledge is one thing. So it's a two-pronged story.
Very good. I completely agree. So knowing the skills we need is one thing, and seeing where they have been built successfully by countries is a completely other thing. So Erin, let me come to you. Despite this lethargy that Malini has spoken about, there are models that are working quite well. So for your answer, you can obviously go back to Australia as well. Are there global or regional development models that have successfully equipped communities to participate in sectors that are emerging, such as offshore energy or smart logistics?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good question. So I've sort of got two experiences to talk about, or two angles to talk about on this. So I'll start with sort of an overarching point that's relevant to both, is that this is something that we're grappling with at the moment. I don't think there's any necessarily right answer or perfect model or example that you can point to where we've got this right, because it's actually a transition that's happening. We're still in that journey. So whether we're talking about an energy transition, whether we're talking about a digital transition, and of course that applies to the blue economy as well. So in the Australian experience, at the end of the day, our economy is built on commodities exports, right? Iron ore, coal, gas. And until you once you understand that, then you can understand how difficult it is for a country like Australia to go through these transitions. Because, fundamentally, these are, yes, there are opportunities, and there's loads of impact studies and analysis out there to say that, that these sectors can create so many jobs, whether it's, you mentioned offshore energy, but whether it's that or something else in the renewables space, it's such a journey to take people who are currently in jobs and move them into an entirely new sector. So I think that's something that we're really grappling with, and I don't think that Australia necessarily, has the answers on that. The other experience that I can talk about is in Central Asia and the South Caucasus. So I did some work with the ADB here on policy development in terms of managing the dual transitions of the energy transition and the digital transition. And in some senses, regions like this that are going through, they're sort of facing an interesting geostrategic period with the influence of Russia, to some extent China, but the real threat there to economies is actually Russia turning off that, the buying oil and gas from countries like Kazakhstan, for example. So in a way, regions like this are a little bit more proactive in working together to sort of move forward. And so an example there is CAREC, which is the Central Asia Regional Economic Cooperation, the CAREC 2030 strategy, and it's all about managing this transition collectively as a region and going forward. And falling under that are a range of, so there's the education piece, there's the reskilling piece, and so on. So I think that's an interesting example to look at, and we don't often, particularly from my part of the world, don't often look to Central Asia and the South Caucasus. It's very far away. It's strategically not had a huge amount of relevance to us, economically not really a big partner. But when we start to look at how they're approaching some of these problems, I think there's lessons that we can learn there.
I really like that you mentioned that there's no right model. You mentioned that it's very difficult to shift people from one aspect to another when it comes to these kinds of things. But let me just ask you, you've talked about the education, you've talked about the other slices. What about institutional support? Do you feel that there's enough institutional support in order to move us towards what is close to a right model?
So from the Australian experience, this is really political, and I don't think Australia is unique in that either. Like, the idea of moving away from fossil fuels for a number of different reasons. So you have the political overlay, is net zero the right agenda for us or the right policy posture, or should we just scrap that altogether and get rid of our international commitments? So that's sort of one piece to it. But the other political overlay is that the people who are working in these traditional jobs and industries in fossil fuels and so on are people who are members of unions, of trade unions, and those trade unions are inextricably linked with our Labor Party in Australia. So on one hand, you've got the Labor Party, who are, relatively progressive when it comes to climate change and a shift to renewables, and they've done enormous policy work in Australia on critical technologies and all this sort of stuff. which is great. But at the same time, who's going to keep them in power? It's the workers who are, who are working in the mines, who are working in the Maritime Union of Australia, in our ports. It's people who, and so how do you bring them along for that journey? And I think that, you can have all of the policy positions in the world, but what do politicians care about is numbers, numbers, numbers. So I think you can have institutional support, but unless you can bring people on politically, then you're going to have a much more difficult time ahead.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. So essentially models will not work without partnership. You need to have a collective approach to it. So collaboration here becomes quite critical, right? So Akanksha, I'm going to come to you for my next question. How can governments, industry, and educational institutions collaborate to make skill development accessible, relevant, and aspirational in underserved areas?
Well, firstly, thank you for asking this question because it is such an important aspect. I'm a firm believer that blue economy, and we are sitting here listening, hearing, and also practicing blue economy in some way or the other. It won't succeed until we'll invest in people in the same way that we invest in infrastructure. And you talked about the collective model. So I think, there have been various examples of trust-based models between the government and the industry. And I think here's the inflection point that we need to move towards a data-centric model when it comes to a collaborative partnership between industry, government, and academia, particularly with respect to blue skills and blue jobs. I'll give you an example of what we do at DP World. Because it's really interesting to see that, whenever we commission any port operations or any logistics site, we start with the job profiling as soon as we start with the infrastructure development. So I think that goes parallel to our development aspect, and that gives us enough runway and opportunity to train people locally. And I would emphasize on this local skill development a lot because this is what we need to thrive. Port comes with its own ecosystem development in its own way, and it's really important to engage the local people because it's a labor-intensive ecosystem. And therefore, whenever we commission a project, we start with that heads up to the government that, look, these are the job profiles and the job roles that we would need. And I think industry players like ourselves, there's a huge responsibility on us to give this heads up to the government and academia. Then comes the other aspect, which you asked about, the collective partnership, right? That government and academia should collaborate together to fill that market demand-based job profiles and roles. So here we partner with the Logistics Sector Skill Councils, which is a part of the National Skill Development Curriculum, and we try giving those industry-based job roles to the government so that they can come up with the profiles, train people, and then they could be future-ready and enterprise-ready. So I think it needs to be a journey between, what the different players and the stakeholders group work together. But definitely it has to be a collaborative data-centric model rather than just merely a trust-based model.
So you're coming from DP World, and apparently there are some strategies that's working for you. How would you recommend other companies also take this up? So you've talked about how there needs to be local capacity building. I'm sure this is not happening everywhere. It has to be very contextual, right? So what would you recommend? How do we work together with academia and government? How do we make that a reality and a success story, as DP World has done?
Look, we have this wonderful strategy of our world, our future, and that gives us an opportunity of creating shared value. So I'll give you another example, which is a little away from blue skills, but it's very interesting that we are training rural women to become solar engineers from the communities, and they can, access clean energy and make it accessible to the whole village. And I think this is a fantastic example of how we are actually involving and engaging with the local communities wherever we are operating. So it's not just about blue skills, but it is more importantly about engaging and creating jobs locally wherever ports or maritime sector is involved in.
Thank you. I appreciate you bringing up the gender question as well, because that is something that I do want to unpack in a little while. But I'm glad that the point here has been made that as you modernize, be it in a company or elsewhere, you have to make sure that communities don't lose their identity, right? So, Carmen, I want to come to you with this question on community. How can we embed the local ecological and community knowledge into vocational training so that we avoid losing cultural identity as we modernize our learners' skills?
I would like to come from the perspective of a coastal community of fishers. Amidst all the discussion on blue jobs and new opportunities, the coastal community of fishers, which is in my country 1.1 million, who are the least of those who actually still are in the hunter-gatherer sort of livelihood, are the ones that are going to be extremely affected as we have development going on across all these areas. And I think that one of the main things that we have to get them to be able to do is fintech, to get them involved in being able to get financial involvement. Maybe they can sell their products directly, cutting up the middlemen, getting more income from that. The other was processing technology, because at the moment they're selling raw fish and iced fish, which is basically very low in the value chain. And if they can be able to be geared towards developing processing technology, and I've seen a few where they actually set aside catch immediately for drying and processing, and not those that were left behind from unsold stuff. And that will it will lose out in the smell and all that stuff, hygiene, all those stuff. The other thing is aquaculture. Aquaculture is increasingly becoming a major part, and the fishers are losing their catch. And therefore, we should develop technologies that could actually involve coastal fishers in aquaculture. In the Philippines, we have milkfish, tilapia, crabs, shrimp, and seaweed. And among all those five, only seaweed will be very capable for the local fisher. And so we have to do something about that to be able to increase that. And finally, I think it will be the carbon tech. How can they become more aware of how they can use the blue carbon and the trading of carbon into their systems so that they can then cash into their natural endowments? So as we develop in the areas that we are discussing here, we also have to talk about the local fisher and those communities who have traditionally been moved towards tourism. But given all the climate issues, and right now, that even is very unstable. So yes, I guess vocational training is one thing. The other is just to have day-to-day abilities with new jobs and new processing technologies that will involve them.
Thank you, Carmen. I have two follow-up questions for you, because you've raised the prospect of blue carbon, which is something that's a hot topic in Seychelles as well. But first, I wanted to come to you on this question of community one more time. Conflict management when it comes to communities and policymakers. How do we balance that scientific training with traditional practices when they occasionally appear to conflict? Are our communities a little resistant to change, would you say, or are they open to working with policymakers towards a better future?
I think that is a site-by-site system. And in island communities with good leaders, you actually have immediate buy-in, and the leaders, like an example will be Mayor Coro in Siargao Islands. He has set in a system that basically got the community to believe that instead of selling their products like mud crab abroad, they bring abroad to their backyard and create a condition wherein you have all these tourists coming in and they're willing to pay even more than what they will sell their materials for in a higher value. But in areas where you do not have good leadership and good vision, the other thing is to embed these blue carbon and maybe these new changes to make it future-proof in terms of the leader that takes charge. And in some cases, it would be, for example, raising a mangrove to the heritage site level. And it will take a lot for somebody to actually change that. The other thing would be to introduce technologies like the Norwegian aquaculture cages and make that government-led, local people managed. And eventually, when the money comes in, then, as they say, to make it sexy, make money. And that's the best thing, I guess, that you can actually do for the local communities.
Thank you so much, Carmen. So she's brought in a very sexy topic on the panel today. And let me turn to the one man on my panel who's holding it strong over there. Ramesh, you're coming from ports. Your expertise is ports. And ports is, as you said just before we met, ports is now a funky topic. So as ports digitize, which traditional port roles are transforming rather than disappearing? And how should the training curricula adapt?
Thanks, Marshi, and I'll try and kind of frame that also in a little bit of a two-step where I think if you take the digitization part of it, it is creating jobs that were previously inaccessible to different sections of the community, particularly women. So if I just take Sri Lanka as an example, 51% of our potential workforce are women, of which only 34% are actually in the workforce. So just in a generic sense, there's a huge gap of underemployed women. And if you then take the port sector or the maritime sector as within that, it's under 2% of women who are in the maritime sector. So it's hugely underserved. And I think technology is creating a fantastic platform because it creates an environment that is really gender neutral. It doesn't matter, you don't have to be a docker, you don't have to be a crane driver, you don't have to be a heavy lifter to be able to operate machinery, because you're now doing things remotely that have for the last 40 years been done by having to climb a crane or operate a forklift or do something like that. And today's technology is turning those types of jobs into office jobs. So that's a tectonic shift in the way, in terms of accessibility and what technology is doing for access. It also creates, I think that change then also creates an environment where, again, because of the automation, because of the type of technology, that digitization that is happening in every section of the work, because a port is a fantastic ecosystem, as my colleague here from DPW just said, it covers the full spectrum of employment, from a janitor to a mechanic, to an operator, to an office worker, to the whole spectrum. So it is really a microcosm of a massive ecosystem. And if we leave the gender, if we then take the intersection of, which someone else covered, of business with education and vocational training, again, it's a great system within which you can make little things work. For instance, we have an association with the Vocational Training Institute, the National Vocational Training Institute, because we now need technicians in mechatronics. Just having an electronic technician or a mechanical technician is not good enough. There is now an intersection because of the technology of these two disciplines. And so we take in batches of these aspirational students, and one of the conditions of our employment, of our working with them as interns and then offering them employment thereafter, is that we want a certain percentage of that batch to be women. So we are now forcing the issue of trying to address the gender imbalance by saying, okay, we will take 30 students, but at least 15 of them have to be women. And we started with 5 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and today we have 20 of them as girls. So, and this was unthinkable if I look back 5 years ago, that a woman or that a girl doing a vocational training would come into an engineering job to become a mechanic. So that atmosphere has changed. The second thing is, we also have, the other ways of addressing the gender gap. There are two priorities. If I take again the company I work for and Sri Lanka as an example, decarbonization is a huge priority for us, and the parallel activities that go on with decarbonization, in terms of not only do we employ technology for it by reducing our scope 1 footprint, but then we also go a step further by saying, how do we do things like carbon capture reduction? So then we work with communities in terms of creating carbon sinks. So reforestation, mangroves, replanting of mangroves. And that's where the intersection then comes between us and universities. So we work with centers for environment in universities. And again, we are able to specify not only do we want to address the carbon, the footprint issue, but we also want to address it through having a gender balance. And we find that the environment and all the green sciences associated with the blue economy, that can be associated with the blue economy, seem to have a tendency to have a lot more girls and a lot more women in it. So that's another way in which we address it. So those are some of the intersections that I think, Marci, there are.
Yeah, actually, you've done a really good job of painting a very bright future for ports, Ramesh, and I really appreciated that you are highlighting how we can weaken the gender disparity. Of course, we all have to be conscious about that geopolitical landscape that frames almost development in every country, right? But Akanksha, you wanted to come in on the gender disparity question. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add in one perspective that how important it is as an industry player to create an enabling environment from gender and inclusivity lens. And, I have a very beautiful example that we have created an exclusively women-led shift, which is really tough. It was really tough in the beginning at our warehouse and, logistic parks, which is only owned by women operators. So I think, this is just the beginning, but I think that there's a huge responsibility, and it sparks the debate that though technology has leveled the field, but how many, what percentage of women do we have in terms of inclusion at the workforce? So I think, especially in the maritime sector, there is a huge need for creating enabling environment at a larger level.
Yes, absolutely agreed. What I would like to do is, because we have 20 minutes left, before I open up the floor to questions, I would like to have a very rapid fire round with my panelists. I'm going to ask you the same question. I just would like 1 or 2 responses off the top of your head. So, single question. What one intervention do you think would most rapidly accelerate blue skills readiness for our communities along the coastlines, for our countries, for our companies? What is the one single intervention that you think is needed right now? I would invite anyone to pick up the microphone and start the round.
Okay.
All right, Ramesh.
The only one on the spot. So I think it is the intersection of business, academia, and vocational training with state, with priorities from the government, be they state or national government. I think creating that intersection and driving that intersection will have the greatest impact.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Carmen.
I would think the creation of industries that would be, giving for me, the coastal fisher a dignity that would actually be associated in the same way that, we've always considered these jobs a little bit lower than the rest of everything. But, coming to a processing plant or coming into their own businesses and having to, motorbikes to go to work, that sort of intervention where they would have a certain kind of dignity in labor that is very similar to everybody else.
Thank you, Carmen.
I think another, a little different perspective is to look at it, how do we integrate it and with the mainstream education, right? Blue skill education, and I learned it in the morning itself that, there are countries who have integrated it beautifully at the school level. So I think, it also opens up another vertical and a possibility with huge opportunities for kids to grow up and make their careers into it, especially when it comes to bridging the gender gap.
Thank you very much, Akanksha.
A couple of things, if I may. Carmen, really interesting, you made the point then that often these are lower level jobs, right, or low paid jobs. They're not high value jobs. In Australia, I don't think that is the case, right? Like if you work, let's say you work in shipping, you are highly paid. Like you are really highly paid by global standards. You are rich, actually. And in fact, if you work, if you're at sea for long periods of time, you're really, really rich. Because, for reasons I don't need to explain. And then similarly, if we think about some of these industries, again, you mentioned the offshore energy. I mean, if you're someone working in those sectors, you're an engineer, construction workers get paid so much in Australia, which blows a lot of people's minds. But, you can work in construction and earn a couple $100,000 a year, which is why our building costs and all of the costs of doing everything is so high. Like, We don't have cheap labour to do these jobs in Australia. So it's actually quite a different dynamic, and therefore, if you're a skilled worker in that space, whether you're doing, your skill is something to do with, it's more manual and labour intensive, or you're driving the ship, or you're supervising the port, or whatever it is, those jobs, the attraction is the money. And there's a lot of, there's a lot of conversation in Australia around, well, don't go to university, go and do a vet education, because then you can earn a couple $100,000 a year. So the dynamic is very, very different, and that's got a lot to do with our history around labour laws and so on and so forth. But and anyway, so there's that dynamic for starters. And then the second thing I wanted to say was I sort of wanted to challenge your question about, like, what's this one thing that we could do, and what is this one intervention we could have? Do we need to be thinking about the future as jobs? Like, do we need to be thinking, one thing that Australia did really badly was we don't have a sovereign wealth fund. Like, everyone in Australia should be, we are a rich country, but we should be a heck of a lot richer per capita based on the history of our resources sector. And as that becomes more valuable, as we automate and so on and so forth, like, we should be a much richer country as individuals. We have a lot of people...
If you say so.
Right? No, but we should, right? And so that's something Norway's done really well with sovereign funds and wealth planning for their country, and we didn't do that. And in a way, I'm like, well, we as the people should own the resources, not a couple of billionaires who live, these extraordinary lives, while, the median income in Australia is still only around $60,000 a year, which is nowhere near buying a house or nowhere near being able to... You're not living in poverty, but you're not far off it on $60,000 a year in Australia with our cost of living, right? So it sounds rich elsewhere, but it's not when you're there and having to live through it. Now, UBI, I'm not particularly a fan of universal basic income personally, but there's a conversation to have there as well. So do we need to look at a different future, or is it, and do we need to look at these different options rather than this very traditional jobs economy, and, particularly because the world is changing.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Akanksha.
One more thing I wanted to really add is blue skills is one thing, and blue jobs is another thing, right? And that gap is not small, unfortunately. What Indian government has done beautifully well is created sector-specific councils. So I think there is a logistics sector skill council. But I think how many of these students are landing up with jobs is something that, the industry players have to really question, because market-ready job skills are also something that's debatable, right? And that's something where we need to put more attention towards. So I think I just wanted to bring that into perspective as well.
Thank you very much. Malini.
Akanksha stole my thought. Okay. So when I speak to the industry, they say that, there are jobs going, but there are not enough qualified people. This is the Indian context I can talk about. So I think one intervention is not just opening up skilling courses and upskilling, reskilling, but to ensure that it meets the requirements of the industry. Government is taking sufficient steps for the industry as well as, the stakeholders to do more. So that's one, skilling to ensure that it actually gets you the job and it's a match with what the industry wants. The second, and I will leave with this larger thought, is in India, awareness regarding the maritime sector is actually not as much as it should be. For example, when I got the post of Director General Shipping prior to this, my colleagues asked me, so what does the job consist of? And these were colleagues who were in government, who were bureaucrats, me included, and I said, okay, let me just go and take the job, I'll find out and then tell you. So this was about 9-10 years ago, and I think much has improved because in the last few years, the emphasis on maritime sector, ranging from maritime security right down to job skilling, maritime financing, has increased a lot. And the very fact, and this is the last thought I'll share with you, the very fact that the government of India has, raised this India Maritime Week that's happening to a very prestigious international level shows that that's a huge intervention, because then that spreads the word that this is going to grow. This is a sunrise sector, and there are jobs just not on board of ships. The Ministry of Shipping actually changed its nomenclature from Ministry of Shipping to Ministry of Port Shipping and Waterways to ensure, and that includes logistics also. So I think all these interventions will go a long way.
Carmen, go ahead.
Yes, I was just going to say, even if we are an archipelagic country, the awareness of the maritime sector has been very, very low. And I could even find coastal community children who don't know how to swim. And that is really a very, very sad system in itself. But with the recent conflicts and the issues that have been coming out from our area, the awareness of the maritime sector is there. Would you believe that only 3% of the Philippines' GDP is actually of the maritime economy? While Indonesia, Malaysia, everybody is on double digits. And so I guess for us, that would be very, very important. And to capitalize on the awareness that was brought by conflict will be the major thing. And putting that into the educational system will be amazing for me.
Thank you very much. If I have no further interventions from my panelists, I would like to open the floor to any questions and answers. So I hope that this has unpacked a variety of ideas in your head that you would like to share. Please raise your hand and we can start. Gentleman in the front. There's a gentleman in the front.
Thank you very much. I have a quick question. A lot of the debate was around blue collar and blue skills for blue economy. How about the white collar, the senior leadership? I think Aaron alluded to it when she said the senior leadership of the Labour Party in Australia has this conflict that they go through with the different constituencies that they have to appease. But, I mean, how do you change the mindset and the skill set of the senior leadership of the mining firms, of the shipping operators, of the commodity trading firms who have historically been known to have no conscience whatsoever? And if you want to attract a new generation of leadership to these organizations, how do you attract people with a conscience to be the new leaders of an industry that didn't have an appetite to it or reputation for it?
Was your question to a particular panelist?
No, I think kind of any of them.
Anyone who feels free, please.
Do you mind? Yeah, it's a really, really good question. I think if we look at the senior leadership in these kinds of companies in Australia, it's very male-dominated, like it's the pale, male and stale kind of narrative, right? And if you walk into a boardroom in Western Australia, where a lot of these companies are based, it's a bit old school. And I think that like the question for me then around this is how do you attract more women to the sector? So when we look again at the blue collar workers, what's interesting in Australia is a lot more women are going into those kinds of jobs that historically were male dominated jobs. The unions have done a very good job at attracting women who will then vote in a particular way, right? I'm being a little bit cynical there, but that has happened. And also they're attracted to the salaries because you can get paid a huge amount of money in those blue collar jobs. So particularly if they're less educated or whatever. But then on the leadership side of things, they're really male dominated industries. I don't know a lot of women walking around saying, I really want to work in the maritime industry. And I think that there's a cultural element here. Now, I grew up in a shipping family. My father is a master mariner. And so I grew up spending a lot of time on vessels. And I'm going to be a little bit crass, but bear with me. In the 80s and 90s, let's go the 90s, which is the period I remember, plus it makes me sound a bit younger. When I would go and visit visit my father on the ships in Fremantle Port, there was pornography all over these ships, right? So this is just the 1990s and Australian vessels, you know? And so why women weren't working offshore. And then as he sort of ended up going towards retirement, you had female master mariners or female mates on the ship and so on. So it did change. And I reckon if you went on a ship today, there would be absolutely no pornography on those ships. That's like less than one generation that change has happened. So then if you think about, there wasn't sort of the soft pull to that industry. And then if you think about head officers and all of that kind of stuff, you know, so this is a process, and to change it as like an attractive career to women, to change that dynamic. There's a whole bunch of different things, but I think that little anecdote just gives you a sense of it's not actually that long ago what it was like in this kind of industry.
Just to clarify, your question was on leadership, not on the blue collar but the white collar, right? So Some of the things that I had mentioned regarding AI and electronics engineering, they are not blue-collar jobs. They are definitely white-collar jobs. And India, for example, has in the global market, shipping market at least, we go from number 2 to number 5. We keep, depending on which country, overtakes us or goes back. Okay? So Indians are the preferred officers on board ships. So apart from the technical side, there are different courses that many universities run on port and ship management, logistics management. So the leadership has to come from people who do those courses, management courses, supply chain, logistics, etc. Plus a whole lot of seafarers now, they can sail, there is no retirement age. They can sail until their medical certification is okay. But many of them nowadays, in the last 20 years, prefer to shift to shore jobs and they become the leaders. So that's how leadership develops.
And I think, I don't know any industry at the leadership, honestly, in white collar, which is not male dominated. And that's so unfortunate. So I think maritime is not an exclusion, but, this is changing. So what's changing actually in maritime is that there are new entrants, including women, which are finding their ways and navigating through the levels up. And that's where we need to bridge the gap. But I think, it's not exclusive to maritime sector, unfortunately, though. Yeah.
No, but just to be on a positive note, because I didn't touch upon the gender aspect at all. So in the Indian Maritime University, for example, 10 years ago, we had just 14 ladies in all the 6 campuses, and we now have 192. So I think it is growing, and it will grow.
And I think, I'm not sure of the exact statistic of the ratio between sort of onshore jobs and offshore and sailing jobs. But I think one of the things that technology will drive is that ratio will change dramatically from people actually at sea to people working on land. And so that will drive a shift, obviously, in the whole leadership dynamic as well. And much of that dynamic is around gender because, as everyone said, there is a preponderance of male dominance in the boardrooms and at senior leadership level. But again, I believe that, again, technology will be the driver of that equalizer and change that as well. And you'll have a whole raft of, in today's situation where ships are 20-year assets and that are $300 million a pop, and then you need to build billion-dollar ports in order to service those ships. And there is such a massive dearth of port capacity in certain parts of the world. So we are going to see a whole range of jobs that have got literally nothing to do with going to sea. And I think that will be the big driver of change.
In my country, I had a person come up to me and say, "You're in one of the big top 4 universities, Menchie, right?" I said, "Yeah." "Tell me, how many of your graduates, 10 years after they graduate, will be in charge of $500 million of a company's assets after they graduate from your university?" I guess they forget, or we forget, the value of maritime jobs. And they are not seen as one of the top jobs that are seen as attractive. But we have 500,000 Filipinos out there who are actually seafarers. And that's half the number of coastal community fishers, which is like 1.1 million. So I guess by creating an awareness of the importance of the contribution of these jobs to our country and taking us away from the idea that a university position and getting an MBA or these traditional jobs that were for the land would be the best way for us to be able to build this. And we do not have a Ministry of Fisheries. In the whole region, we don't. We're the only ones that doesn't have one. And so sometimes you kind of wonder, am I in the Philippines? It's an archipelago. And we have a history of maritime. But the long colonization period has actually made us inland.
Erin, go ahead.
I just want to make one point and pick up on something you've just said there, Carmen. There is a dynamic here between the rich countries and the developing countries here, and that is that our commercial arrangements, particularly offshore, the way that the labour laws work, are basically they're dependent on having a cheap workforce, often from the Philippines or Indonesia, and they're not getting the same benefits if you were on an Australian flag vessel in Australia, you know. And I think that remains really problematic, because if you're an Australian working on those vessels, you get paid this much. If you're a Filipino on those vessels, you get paid this much. You know, so you have this two-tier, I mean, I'm no expert in this, but the labour market that exists within the maritime industry and the way those laws are applied puts Filipinos at a really significant disadvantage. And I think that's something that could be addressed, but we know that the companies wouldn't necessarily like that. Yeah.
All right, thank you for your question. Thank you for the interventions. We have time for one more question, if possible. Whoever gets the microphone, go to the lady in front. I'm really sorry, I saw her first.
Good evening, everyone. My question is in context of India. With respect to coastal communities of India, how can we build opportunities for them? How can we nurture the skills in them? Because the traditional coastal communities, they lead a very primitive, traditional kind of lifestyle. So how can we build better skills, better opportunities for them? And it's not just a skill building process, but I feel we need to bring behavioral changes in them. So what are the challenges and how can we navigate this?
Is your question addressed to someone in particular? Or anyone in the panel? Go ahead.
If I may attempt, yeah. So there are several aspects to it. One is for the traditional coastal communities, you know, how do we provide them opportunities at least, you know, to access alternate livelihoods. So, you know, so for example, we are training them on alternate livelihoods and, you know, so that the next generation could find their ways out, at least, you know, and do away with the traditional methods. So that's one aspect. Second aspect is, you know, the funding required to actually create those blue jobs and skill sets. So, you know, for example, we have, DP World has floated a $100 billion blue bond through private placement. And, you know, we are using the proceeds of that for blue skilling. And I think that's one of the important aspects of creating local skill sets and local employment, which is very important, and it needs money, right? So, you know, I think the blended finance models and the new investment opportunities that have come up would play a huge role in financing these local needs. The third aspect is how do we create a shared economic model with the community and the port operation. So I think that is very critical, because it calls for a very long collaboration. It calls for, you know, trust-based models between how do we engage the local communities into the port operations, how do they see SMEs developing over a period of time around the port. So I think port, which are essential vehicles of trade, need to have and promote SMEs and small and medium enterprises to grow further and entrepreneurship to develop. So I think that's something which we are doing in a very big way. We are promoting trade corridors. We are promoting local small and medium entrepreneurs to grow and provide access to them in terms of market, trade, finance, and export capabilities. So these are some of the things that came to my mind.
Two examples, stories both. Lakshadweep is fully coastal community. They learn to swim before they learn to walk. Natural seafarers. I mean, if you see them going on ships, you'll be, I don't understand why IMO insists on training for them. So what we did from the Directorate General of Shipping is we said, instead of getting them onto the mainland to do training, we said all that they need for a COC, Certificate of Competency, is to have a 15-day training. And that's very simple. One of it is swimming, which they can pass in the first instance. So we conducted the course there. At the end of it, they do not want to leave that area and go and work anywhere else. That's one story. The second one is off the coast of Tamil Nadu. The fishing folk again. I mean, they're natural seafarers, right? We tried to tell them, and we are still working on it, to say, why don't you prepare yourself for these exams, the common entrance exams, which will get you into universities, into colleges, even diploma, so that you can go up in the ladder of maritime sector. Interesting, your point was right. Behavior is an issue because they're extremely competent and skilled at steering the boat, but they do not want to write an exam. So we are working on it. It has to be worked through coastal NGOs to say, okay, all we need, whether it is coastal Tamil Nadu or Lakshadweep, is one or two of those boys or girls who crack that ceiling and come, and then they go on board, and then, like she said, then money is the glamour, and they will know that, there is much more to life than this. But leaving all this apart, what the government of India is doing, and the ministry and all of us are into it, is actually picking up students who have done ITI. This is the Industrial Training Institutes of India. They do mechanical engineering, they do electrical engineering, but to upskill them for marine engineering, because the jobs in marine engineering are much more than the jobs in mechanical engineering at the moment. And to give them practical training through internships, through the Logistics Council, etc., so that they can be qualified to work on board ships. And there are foreign countries, for companies in foreign countries who are actually coming and looking for such qualified people. But then again, behavioral issues are there. You will be skilled in marine engineering, but you also have to be skilled in communication, which is why I mentioned analytical skills. Analytical skills, they're actually native intelligence. We just need to give them the technical skills and the communication skills. But it can be done. Yeah?
Okay, thank you. I'm afraid this brings us to the end of the panel. I'm very pleased that I had a gender balance from the questioners. I had both a girl and a gentleman ask a question, so I've tried very hard to have a balance. I would like to apologize to the rest of you, but please, the speakers are available if you want to have a conversation offline. May I have a round of applause for my wonderful panel?